everybody. We are back with Kyle Kleege, filmmaker, writer, director. Thank you, Kyle, for being here. Kyle was up late last night. He's a little fatigued. He was on location shooting his new, I guess, short
Teacher.
feature. Oh my, Kyle.
Yeah.
Thank you for making it today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're
So
welcome.
just bear with me as I
We will.
attempt to awaken.
We will. No, I'm telling you, I find my faculties often are enhanced in some way in terms of my access to truth if I am fatigued oftentimes and I can kind of relax. Do you have to shoot tonight as well?
No, I gotta like dress one of the sets and then I shoot tomorrow for luckily smaller scenes. That'll be nice.
Oh,
That'll be
okay.
much nicer than last night. Oh my God. But anyway, it's great.
Cool, man. Well, I hope you can get some rest after the show.
Me
We're going to be
too.
talking about Messy Boys, which is quite the short film. And we will share more. Before I ask you the first question, would you like to introduce yourself and or the short?
All right. So my name is Kyle Kleege. I'm a writer director. I am a co-owner of a small production company called Dirty Sweater Productions, which we mostly focused on shorts. We just did a feature as of last year that's coming out in February 13th called Earworm. Shameless plug, shameless plug.
Nice.
Super low budget, but still like you do what you can, and that's kind of the whole thing my partner and I at the company have been trying to do is just make like tell stories as best we can with what little we have and just to try and get things out in the world. And Messy Boys was one of those stories that escaped.
That's
I think
awesome.
escape might be a good phrase to use for that movie.
I think so. I think so because it's really dark and seedy, and all of us, can relate to having feelings that make us uncomfortable and that we don't want to have, and these are feelings that are out there and exposed. Certainly. So I get escaped with that. Before asking you the first question about Messy Boys, I think it's great what you guys are doing, and I really promote that to all filmmakers. Just get out there, hammer, nail, and sharpen the saw, and just get it done. There's no need to
Mm-hmm.
wait for anyone or anything. So just get your team, So it's awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah.
And Messy Boys is a very fine production. Very, very nicely done, very well executed, high value. There are some it, it's a little bit freaky, there's definitely
Mm-hmm.
freakiness there. And before we dive into, the depths of it, which I hope we will, the first question is really, where did that story live in you, as a concept, as an idea? What are the emotions that generated that for you?
So Messy Boys and the idea had been kind of kicking around in my brain, like the faint trace of an idea had been kicking around the brain for a couple of years. And it was just like, I don't know what that is. That's really weird. And I was kind of focusing on trying to do short films that would be like more readily accepted to festivals, still to no avail. So still like no matter what compromises you'd make. And then I had one short that I was gearing up to do that I was excited about because everything seemed like if it worked, it would have been like, oh, that's a potential festival favorite. And then at the last second, that whole thing just ended up collapsing in on itself, which was heartbreaking. And then in like the wreckage, just kind of sat there thinking like, well, I one am at a loss and I have all this stuff ready to go. Like I might as well do something. But then it was kind of like, what do I do? And then I got more frustrated with myself about feeling like I had compromised a little too much and I wasn't really chasing down anything that I really wanted to say. And it was more like, oh, maybe that idea I was chasing down what other people wanted. So I decided like that idea popped back in and it was like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And I don't care how weird it is, how off putting it is, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And I'm just going to get a lot of weird stuff out of my system.
It's awesome. I love it. It's so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. We're talking a little bit about that, what it's like, wanting to kind of fit into the box, to get discovered, to get recognized, get, seen, to get accolades so you can progress in your career because are really passionate about doing this day in and day out. But then, then there's a selling out side of it. And then there's why am I doing it? And all of a sudden it's very disheartening, riding the highs and lows of it all and just saying, fuck it to all of that, and then just really
Hmm.
saying, hey, let me just make artistic stuff that is what I'm about as an artist, and let's explore the dark side, whether it's the dark side in the way you explored it with Messy Boys, or just the dark side in terms of the unfamiliar territory. That's what we humans want to learn about, is what is the unfamiliar territory that is living in us, so that we can better understand ourselves and be less scared of ourselves and each other.
Hmm.
And so, Messy Boy is just freaking great stab at it, opens up the door at a discussion. Um, and though, there may not be a great deal of resolution in terms of,
Hmm.
what do we make of all that? There is a lot of conversation started there. And that's where it all begins, with talking about stuff that we don't want to talk about, or scared to talk about. So, before I ask you like the second question, really want to hammer in on that first question a little more, is like when you were like, oh, these nebulous ideas, like these little, you didn't know what it was. What were those little things that were floating? Was it a scene, a thought, an idea?
So it I had this moment years ago. I was walking on like a side street and I found just a beat up like help wanted ad on a on like a electric pole, like a telephone pole. It like had clearly been there through for like ages. I don't, and it didn't really have a lot of details. It's like, what
Okay.
the hell is this?
Yeah.
It was one of those things you pass by and you're like, oh, that's kind of gross, and then you walk away from it, and that idea just kind of stays in the back of your head,
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
like, I wonder what that was. And then like the overall like kind of structural idea of just the help wanted thing kind of stuck in, but then as it went on, it kind of became like all these different morphing things that sort of fell into that. I'm like, well, what would that be? And then chasing down, like, oh, would it be this? Would it be that? And then when I was writing it, I had like the kind of basic idea of like, well, someone has to like need a reason to answer this job. And then it kind of went from there as like a more stream of consciousness writing thing of like,
Mm,
I'm just going to chase this down.
mm, mm.
And the thing is, when I was writing it, I thought I was writing an out and out comedy, and then it was, and I still think it's funny. It's just it's not a, when you're writing like, oh man, this is going to be funny, or this is going to be really interesting. Like you're kind of chasing down all these things, but you're still like it, when writing it, it's trying not to be over informed by that. So you're, oh, this could be funny. Don't make it too funny. Just write. So then you're trying to get out of your own way, and you're like, so you stop thinking about like, yeah, this will be this will be that. Then you're like, write, focus, and tell the story however it's going to come out. And so it was like again trying to pull all of these things off, all of these weights, and like fighting through like all of
Mm,
that
mm,
like pre-built-in
mm.
nonsense of expectation, and just being like, all right, I don't care what comes out of this other than I need to just get this out and just tell the story in as uninfluenced or uninformed way as possible, and just kind of let instinct take over. And I had also started storyboarding everything, and then I got to set, and then I'm seeing everything kind of playing out, and I ended up tearing things out of the page because one, we didn't have enough time, and two, we also, it was just like, let's just chase this down. That is way more interesting
Mm,
than
mm,
over like
mm,
structuring
mm, mm,
everything
mm.
overly. And it's like, let it be, just get out of the way. So that was kind of a terrifying experience. The
Oh
whole thing. I
yeah.
think everyone thought I was going to have a heart attack due to stress. And I'm just like, I don't know what we're making at this moment. I don't know what's going to happen next. We had the script, we had everything, but it was kind of like, visually, performance wise, scene to scene, it's kind of like this is morphing into what it wants to be.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
it was kind of like, oh, I have to step away from that. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. It's really brave, man. I for sure to answer the question in terms of how like the morphology of the story got, to where it is and where it started and this idea, this first kernel, it's always so interesting where the kernels come from. And this was like this nefarious, nebulous poster and what is going on and what do they want and what would somebody what kind of position would someone need to be in order to answer a poster like that? And so now we can dive into the story and the meat of it and the meaning of it. And I'm gonna risk first because I always, I never want to put somebody on the spot. Tell me what your story means before I share, what I saw as a viewer. So, it was really
Mhm.
interesting how the freakiness of the kind of the tone of the film was set immediately with the firing scene, right? You've got this engorged, bloated figure that's spouting blood tubes and just profuse, and it's getting uglier. And he's firing this woman who is like non-reactive to him with this engorged, disgusting, rotted state. So to me, you can't help but understand in the terms of a storyline, in terms of the narrative, that's the beginning of the movie, and then the movie focuses on jobs and what we do for jobs, work, career, and even progresses, it continues when you go into the sex thing, den of iniquity or whatever you call it, fun house, whatever, irrespective of judgment, right? That when
Yeah.
you go to that place where that is still a work. That is a professional environment in terms of, hey, we're doing something, making money. That is our living. So, they couldn't help notice how there's the setup of like corporate America and this bloated kind of disgusting thing and this like kind of even PC because we have a black woman who is sitting right by his side very calmly and she's delivering the
Mm.
message, hey, we have to abide by changes we're making and this is all kind of delivered in a way that we're all just doing our jobs kind of a thing. And let's not look at the grotesque side of what's happening. And so the woman's like, okay, I guess I'm fired. She's got this girlfriend. The girlfriend's not at the least sympathetic. And so she feels really pressured to get a job. She answers this ad where maybe she wouldn't do so. And in other circumstances, she goes in, meets this guy at night, and basically she becomes a camera operator for a you probably know the language better than I do, but infantile fantasy thing. What do you
Baby
call that?
play, I guess. I don't
Baby
even
play? Is that what
know.
that's
Yeah,
called?
I'm sure that I think it's again the I mean everything is a fetish and every fetish has a name. And I would assume like baby play or something like that where you kind of become the infant.
Okay.
It is also like they're kind of obviously like regressing like into like babies in
Yeah.
this state and just kind of also chasing down this whole concept of like trying to find like a visual through line of like rebirth
Hmm.
through like systems and stuff and being like, oh, maybe that'll stick. Like
Hmm.
it was not always like the most like cognizant thing of like, oh, this is like the thing I need to say with this, but it was more like that makes sense in my head and that makes sense connecting to this. I don't know if anyone else will get that. And then like talking through, it would be more like to the actress with the who says the line when the boss is like the grotesque boss is choking. Originally, he like powered through it and then it was like, let's give her the line, like let's have another person. And then like in the scene, it's like, oh, this is this is like he's top of the like tier of whatever this heartless corporation is, or at least he's top of like this floor and this department. And then she's looking at him, and essentially you're watching like a promotion play out where he can no longer function. And this next cog in the machine just swoops in to
Hmm.
finish the motion.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then you're watching this person who's just been beat down by life and all this like soulless corporate drudgery and the whole relationship. Like I tried to have like in the text messages when she's flipping through, we had like, and you're not even really going to see most of what we had, but we had like a whole text chain going where kind of spelling out like what exactly is happening. And when they have that for like a couple seconds, but like everything, there was backstory for pretty much everyone in this thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And just trying to create like this weird little world while like not necessarily going in with exact points to make for overall, but everyone kind of had their specific points that they had to be a part of.
Okay, all right. So let's see if we can kind of, focus in the iris on it a little bit. And,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's like, when you talk about the baby thing, I think, oh, that regression, yeah, that's really evident. It's a safe place. Like, oh, let's regress
Yes.
back into childhood because the way that was played out, in that scene, it was a fun, playful, they enjoyed getting changed and it was a safe place to
Mm-hmm.
be and to go from this adult world of corporate carelessness or whatever it might be or I think it's even sanctioned forget corporate structure, just a sanctioned cold callousness of the world, right? The sanctioned callousness
Mm-hmm.
of the world. And then we go into, well, this regression. Well, wouldn't isn't it nice that we could be babies once again and be safe? And then we go through these sexual kind of this entire sexual framework before we go to those last scenes of the baby stuff, and the sexual fetishness of, it's kind of like, I guess the fetish is they're getting more and more reduced to that place, going from that domination to, the other thing. And I guess, getting to the meaning, in
Mm-hmm.
talking about the milieu of events, the milieu of characters and characters' backstory and coming to. And, one of my favorite scenes is where you've got the large black man and the white man who's on his leash coming out, and he's asking in a foreign language, which was unknown to anyone.
German.
Oh, that was German?
It's German.
Oh, no shit. Okay. It makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so in German, is it your 10 o'clock? And then he sheds that beautiful tear when she says no. And
Yes.
then you've got that whole, the dude with the tongue who just really takes the prize there. So going through that kind of digression, um, and that is like fetishes, right? Fetishes are desires and these desire systems and these complexities of desires and the desire for survival and then desire for sexuality and then desire to regress into childhood. Um, it does, and then making money on that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Making money on all that. What is the takeaway? What is the takeaway as a viewer for the perversion? Is it just, hey, our society is pretty perverse,
Mm-hmm. I
or is there, yeah,
I mean, perversions, I think a word that kind of gets uh bandied about. And I wouldn't say like the actions within the house are perverse because again, it's to me it feels like there's a lot of openness and there's a lot of consent in that
yes,
house. Like everyone that is in there is consenting to be a part of these
right,
things.
right.
And it's just the terror of opening yourself up to these different kinds of experiences. And it's like again, like it doesn't have to be your fetish. You don't have to be a part of this, but to me the most perverse aspect is the corporate scene, like that sequence. I think most movies start with like it starts calm and then it becomes terrifying. I think this movie starts terrifying and then becomes calm in a weird way, but it was also trying to, I guess, get at the heart of filming being approached with these kind of not otherworldly, but these kind of unfamiliar experiences and uh ex- yeah, unfamiliar experiences where suddenly if you're seeing these kinds of things approaching you and you're not open to them, it's going to be terrifying. So if we kind of shoot it in a tenser way, we're at least in her headspace of like, okay, I'm a little nervous about that. I'm a little nervous about that. And it's like slowly removing herself from oppression. That's when like the ending and like all that stuff kind of happens. And it's like, oh, we're opening up, we're going through all this stuff. And we're just, by the end, we're just in this cacophony of baby sounds and overlapping visuals. And just, it is now like, it's still kind of terrifying in terms of this transcendent moment if we're going to get highfalutin with that. But to me, that's what it kind of like felt like when emotionally putting it together. Like, oh, that makes sense. But I don't believe the takeaway is to be like, oh, society is perverse, because I don't see nothing in the house to me comes across as morally wrong. Nothing in that house comes across as bad. It's just unfamiliar, and trying to get into that unfamiliar headspace visually to allow like that kind of what the character is experiencing and like kind of carry you through. And that's why there needed to be this kind of tense tone to it. And hopefully it feels like it sort of opens up. It may be fairly disturbing by the end in terms of just how unfamiliar and strange it is, but the fact that like she gets that nice little smile at the end after she, clicks off the phone and just decides to kind of roll with it. So you get that openness. And to me, it's more like opening and a base level for the character and the emotionality. It's opening yourself up to things is like one thing that informs it. But then there's also a lot of like probably some fairly anti-capitalist statements and stuff in there in terms of, well, late stage capitalism, I'll say that. But well, we don't have to wade into that whole thing. But just the whole, I don't know, I think the most disgusting aspect is just the corporate stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I totally appreciate that. I think, one of the things as a viewer, myself, just speaking for myself, is that, I totally am on the same page with you in terms of like, hey, whatever is between two consensual adults is, consensual, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
just, whatever, some sort of a play. Um, However, the tension that's brought up with the way that the, master of the house speaks to her and the guy who's kind of his sidekick, that kind of alludes to, you just don't know if there's going to be, something coming.
Yeah.
So that kind of, for me, made the contents of that environment more like, whoa, what are these people doing? Are they gonna, is one of them gonna come out and eat her face?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of in terms of the tension. I understand you kind of were using that as a tension to, highlight her own lack of comfort with the environment. Um, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, that ultimately it's like she goes through this journey of like being a cog and having to be a cog within a framework to seeing people who are working outside of the framework. And her exposure is to, well, what does it feel like to be outside of that framework? And where can I find the safety and feeling of, comfort, in that
Yeah.
setting. And I think that's very much the humanity that we're all a part of. It's like we all have to put on our pants, go to work, and do something. And it's typically doing, well, it's always doing something for someone, right? We're either in a service,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's for ourselves or for others, whatever. But the question is, well, what is that service? And does that service suit us? And if it doesn't, then it's compromising in some way. So we either have to change our feelings about the service or change the service. So I think it's really poignant. And the question is, well, that's it, right? I mean, that's sort of the takeaway for me is, are we changing our feelings about the service or the service that we're in?
Mm. And obviously that's very valid. And I'm also starting to kind of like really think back on this and a little kind of blown away at like how emotionally autobiographical this movie turned out to be, just given my headspace at the time. And like you kind of sometimes you just don't think about that. And I was like, oh, okay.
It's always like
That's
that.
yeah, it's always the unconscious Kyle being like, this is what you meant. Like this is what I'm going through. And
And what
I
was
was like,
that? Do tell. I'm sorry I
well,
interrupted.
again, it's it's again jumping back to like the whole like frustration as just a filmmaker and expression and just being like,
Right,
what am I doing? And just constantly like
right,
throwing
right,
shorts out and feeling
right.
like you're just not hitting it. You're not hitting, you're connecting, and you start thinking like, am I just not good enough? Like maybe if I change this and that, people will like it. And then you start chasing down this very dangerous things that remove any sort of self-expression. And it's not to say like doing the kind of like readily accepted things is a bad thing. Like, yeah, no, you can make cool blockbusters, you can do that, but when it's like you're just trying to figure yourself out while making a movie, and it's like I don't like if I'm interrupting that, because to me it's like you make a short film and you're kind of like you're finding your own style, you're sharpening your tool, you're doing this, and then like yeah, you can throw in there and be like, oh, I'll make something kind of sort of similar in the style of this so I can learn craft. But when you're really trying to get to the heart of like who you are as an artist and like how you move forth as a
The voice
director,
of the
then it's like
story,
yeah, when you're trying to
ultimately, yeah.
find that and it's you feel compromised, it's a very dangerous feeling. And then that like um you start to bottom out like emotionally and mentally and feeling like I can't do this anymore, I'm not good enough. And then Messy Boys was kind of like coming from the bottom and being like, I'm just gonna do whatever the hell I'm gonna do. A lot of people tried to talk me out of it too. They're like, but why would you do that? Like we could do some fun stuff with the like instead, like we had a couple of borrowed lenses and cameras. Like we had a really good expensive setup that were just favors kind of given us for the days we had for the shoot. And I was like, well, we can have a really great looking movie. And I was like, we're doing this one. And I was like, why this one? We're doing this one. So it turned into this whole thing of like I gotta get this out of me because I can't function if I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
So it
Staying
was
true.
again, yeah,
Staying true, staying true. And that has to go through messy territory.
yeah.
I think it's awesome, man. I think, I really admire your courage. You're a courageous filmmaker and courageous person. And it's courageous to talk about your film in a thematic, systematic way, like, hey,
Mm.
this is the plot line, this is the plot structure, and what is it saying? And that's brave. And it's not didactic, and you certainly didn't do it in a didactic way at all. But
No.
that's the risk, that filmmakers don't like
Yeah.
to do that. Any artists are kind of like, well, let the audience figure it out. And it's cool,
Hmm.
but it's such a gift to be able to talk to the artist about their film and the content and where they were so that we can better understand it and better understand ourselves, no matter what artist it is. Um, so really appreciate you doing that. The last question,
Okay.
play it forward. How have you been changed as a person since making Messy Boys?
I am much more open to just kind of allowing certain things to happen on set because beforehand it would be like, oh, this or that, and like you kind of feel this overwhelming anxiety of getting everything just right or everything has to be exactly like this way or a certain way. And now like I do not feel that anxiety or stress like anywhere near where I used to. And like I'm the luckily I did that because I did a feature after it, which was also like tight schedule, very tight budget, and also was just like, well, I'm gonna just make I have access to this. I have this kind of feeling of like I got a bunch of things out of my system with Messy Boys. I'm feeling open. I might as well try to just do something on my own and try to get the film into the world. Like I don't care what anyone says or like how difficult they say it is to sell a feature. It's just like we're just going to make a movie. Like we're gonna make this next step. We got to do it. So I kind of feel like the bravery kind of kicked up, and that kind of like I won't even say it's like a foolish thing because it's not. Again, you got to kind of charge in sometimes, like full bore, and just be like, screw it. Like let's just do this. So getting that feeling back of like we're just gonna make it happen. Like I don't care how long it takes. Let's like we're gonna make this happen for ourselves. And that was a nice feeling to get back after all the kind of disheartening setbacks and failures and failure to connect in like certain avenues, and then feeling like I could do it again. So
Yeah.
Massey Boys gave that back to me.
That's awesome. I mean, between the openness and the less anxiety, whether it's off, on set or off, because like it's got to carry over.
Yeah.
The inspiration to continue what the art and artistry is all about is, it's awesome. That's everything.
Yeah.
And the identity. I hear your identity in that too, and
Mm-hmm.
being true to that.
Yeah. And it's always it's kind of wild when you like Messy Boys is just tearing everything out because originally I tried to hide behind more of a deliberate like Hitchcockian De Palma style like fancy camera moves and stuff. And I had like it storyboarded every single shot, every single movement was supposed to be
Mm,
choreographed and like,
mm,
oh, we're
mm,
gonna do all this stuff. And then on
mm.
set, it's just like that's not gonna work. Like
You
that's
don't
not
need
this
it.
kind of movie. Like
Yeah.
it then that realization of just like when you realize you are completely alone with nothing but your instincts and whatever the movie's going to do is it feels terrifying at first, but then it's like, oh, you just got to be open to it.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of
then
like
that
life. You got to trust
exactly.
yourself. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kyle Kleege, filmmaker, writer, director, thank you so much for being on Play It Forward. The film we talked about is Messy Boys. I'm looking forward to checking out the feature and looking forward to sharing this with the audience.
I look forward to it too. And thank you for having me.
You got it, Kyle. All right, everybody on Play It Forward, we're out. Peace. Thank you for being here again, Kyle. Love it. Nice.
Peace
Nice. The
out.
gesture. Yeah, we got what we needed.